Some reports from some anonymous scouts, coaches about Chase Young's play. What's he going to be for the San Francisco 49ers? And George Kittle about to start breaking some records and already historical. Going down as one of the best ever in 49ers history, but he's going to be at the top of the record books as well. All that and more coming up right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to live edition of Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you as always at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Appreciate all of the everydayers out there. Starting to see you jumping already into the chat. And of course, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Croc, I want to start with George Kittle. We've got a lot of Chase Young content this week. Obviously, the big move at the trade deadline, trading for Chase Young. Some interesting comments. Maybe there's a negative side to it, and Chase Young has been somewhat disappointing and very disappointing, probably for what you would expect someone with his talent level, his physical ability as the number 2 overall pick in the draft just a few years ago, still on his rookie contract when he was traded. But let's start with a current 49er, a longtime 49er now, an OG 49er as far as Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are concerned. That is George Kittle. And shout out to our guy Al Sacco, 49ers Web Zone. And he relayed this that I did not realize. And we already know that George Kittle is already probably the best tight end in 49ers history. But he's about to pass some serious heavy hitters in 49ers history. George Kittle passed Vernon Davis for most receiving yards by a tight end. Kittle has 5,697 receiving yards. Davis had 5,640. So he already, and I didn't realize this, and I didn't hear a lot of people talking about it, George Kittle already passed Vernon Davis for the most receiving yards in 49ers history for a tight end. But George Kittle is not going to stop just at being, a tight end with where his yards end up. Kittle is 205 yards behind Billy Wilson for 5th all-time in receiving yards for San Francisco. Now, some of the old-time 49ers, like what a tight end was, a split end, a wide receiver, some of that stuff gets kind of wishy-washy as far as positions go. But George Kittle already number 6 all-time. Now, I don't think he's going to catch Jerry Rice, Croc, but congratulations to George Kittle on passing Vernon Davis, most receiving yards by a tight end in 49ers history. He's at 5,697 career receiving yards. Next up, Billy Wilson. And then we're talking about names like Clark, Owens, Washington. Jerry Rice has twice as many as Owens. Jerry Rice has 19,247 receiving yards just as a 49er. So we would have to have 4 more careers of what George Kittle has done so far to get there. I don't think that's going to happen, but congrats to Kittle. And I don't know, how high do you think George Kittle can go? Can he get, he's just shy of 3,000 more yards to reach Terrell Owens to be the second leading receiver in 49ers history, Croc. And I'd be shocked if he doesn't pass Dwight Clark for number 3. Clark's at 6,750 yards. He only has about 1,100 yards to go to pass Clark for number 3.
So he's definitely going to pass Clark.
Yeah.
Now, passing Terrell Owens, that should be like the big milestone because nobody's catching Jerry Rice with anything that he did. And I really hate kind of the pushback on Jerry Rice. People talk about how talented or lack of talented he was. Like, dude was amazing in every aspect of his game. You talked about George Kittle just trying to catch Jerry Rice. You'd have to have 4 more careers of what you've already done, and George Kittle isn't getting any younger. So shout out to Jerry Rice. He's definitely the GOAT, greatest of all time. But as far as George Kittle goes, catching Terrell Owens, I think that would be a huge accomplishment, but he's going to need one, to stay healthy, right? Like that's the big thing. Whatever, what takes him out of this consideration, it's missing a lot of time. And then the other thing would be Kyle Shanahan. Like Kyle Shanahan, is he ever going to feature him, right? Like we look at Travis Kelce, what he's doing in Kansas City, he's featured. He's going to get his 9-10 targets a game. George Kittle doesn't know if he's going to get 10 targets or 1 target in a game. And more times than not, it's closer to 1 than it is 10. And I think that'd be really difficult. And the crazy thing is how his career started off. He was a guy in his second year, going out, just putting up massive yards. He had a season where he had the most receiving yards by a tight end in the history of the NFL over one season, right? Like the trajectory he was on was, I'm going to break all these records and I will be second to Jerry Rice. But then it started to slow down a little bit and maybe a little too much, especially when you look at his usage. So Terrell Owens, I think that should be the goal. Can you get to him? But it's going to be predicated on how Kyle Shanahan utilizes him from here on out. Got to stay healthy. And how long does he play football? Because I feel like, I don't know, there's wrestling coming up near in his future.
Yeah, maybe some WWE promotions in Kittle's future. And he'll be amazed whatever he does post football. We're definitely not trying to push him out the door. He turned 30. He turned this month in October. So Kittle, and congratulations on being the greatest tight end in 49ers history. How long can he play? He's signed through 2025. And I think back to, do you remember when Randy Moss was a San Francisco 49er, Croc? He was washed.
Yes. He was not.
He was
Randy Moss
or something. He was
what Jerry Rice did was. What I was going to say, what Jerry Rice did was magical, right? Like, at 33 years old, he had 1,800 receiving yards. Like, you won't see that. Like, you just don't see things like that happen. So I think it's more normal to see kind of what happened with Randy Moss, what's happening with Julio Jones, right? Where it's just like, you kind of just fall off a cliff a little bit where it's like, man, I'm really good, really good. Then it's like, it starts to slow down. And Quan Bolden kind of had like this late, weird kind of resurgence. Like, I don't even think you typically see that. But George Kittle, he is kind of approaching those years where it can start getting a little tricky. I think he's still like really good. Obviously, we just watched him last game. We saw he's more than capable of being productive. It's just not really a pass-first offense, and they definitely don't feature him. So it's going to be tough. We've seen him in a couple games now where he really got opportunities to have big games. Like not even the Cowboys game. He was targeted 4 times. But the Giants game, and this past game, and the only reason why the Bengals game he got those targets was because the game was kind of out of hand and late. Okay, we got to throw the ball. Let's just throw it 4 straight times to George Kittle up the seam. Like, that's what he's capable of doing. And we don't utilize him. Okay, here's a question real quick, a little bit away from the stats. Why does it take being down, double-digit scores with little time left to target George Kittle the way they did late in that Bengals game? It was like he had like 3, 4, 5 straight catches and chunk yardage. And I feel like he could be utilized like that all the time, and they just don't do it.
There's a lot of mouths to feed in the offense. He's obviously a really good blocker. I don't think just him blocking, he doesn't do that so much on passing downs that it should hinder his his statistics or his production too much. He has been a nice weapon for Brock Purdy in the red zone. So Brock Purdy has 20? At some point, Brock Purdy had 22 touchdown passes, and 10 of them were to George Kittle. So that's good. But between the 20s, like let's target George Kittle a little bit more. He's a weapon. He can get open. He can make plays after the catch. He should be somebody that you are trying to feature as much as possible in your offense.
We've been talking about this even when the offense was doing well, right? It's like, man, the offense is doing well, but, I guess we can't argue too much with it because, how can you complain that he's not getting the rock when you're putting up 35 points? Well, now they're not. So now we can complain a little bit like, all right, can you get this guy the ball? Maybe it wouldn't look the way it does. Like a lot of people are talking about, well, you need Deebo Samuel out there. And that's the missing piece, Deebo. And you can't have this affection off. Well, maybe just use George Kittle a little bit more. Like I was so upset in the Cleveland Browns game that I want to say after his first reception, he got targeted 1 time. And his first reception was on the first drive of the game. And like Debo leaves the game, Christian McCaffrey leaves the game, and he still only gets 1 target for the rest of the game. Like, to me, like, that's ridiculous. So I don't know. Things like that happening is going to be really hard for him to get to Terrell Owens, but he definitely will get to Clark at 3.
So if the pace that he's on currently is about an 800-yard pace this year, last year he had 765 receiving yards in 15 games. So if he stays on like this current pace, around 800 yards, receiving yards per season, he's going to have 400 more receiving yards this year. Then he's got 2 more seasons of 800 receiving yards to finish out the rest of his contract. He signed through 2025. So that'll be 2,000 total more yards, which would put him at 7,697, which would put him well above Dwight Clark, but still 1,000 yards short of Owens. So he's going to need to stay healthy. He's going to need another contract with the 49ers and be playing into age 33 and into his mid-30s if he's going to catch Terrell Owens. I absolutely think he can do it, but he's got to stay healthy, and it would be helpful if he got bigger chunks of yards now, like we saw last week, 11 targets, 9 catches for 149, instead of games like Cleveland where he's targeted twice, 1 catch for 1 yard. You know, those kind of games can't happen. He was targeted once in the Arizona game, targeted 4 times in the Dallas game. He was targeted only 3 times in the Rams game. By the way, those 4 targets led to 3 touchdowns in the Dallas game. Those are the only touchdowns he scored this year, Croc, was the 3, all of them coming in the Dallas game. So yeah, more George Kittle usage. We saw it last week, man. Target him. 11 targets, 9 catches for 149. That's difference making production from a tight end who's a nightmare and a weapon to be used on offense. Think he'll do it? Number 2? Number 2 all
time? I don't think he'll do it. I don't think he'll do it. I think he can do it. I think he clearly has the ability to do it, but I think they just kind of go away from him a little too much, and it feels more and more like he's the odd man out when it comes to being that productive guy in the offense. Like last year is like he was able to get 800, and that was with Debo missing some games and, you know, changing quarterback and all that type of stuff. And it feels like even this year, when all the guys are out there, they just go further and further away from Kittle, which is really weird because you would think maybe there's a decline with him, but then you watch him last game and it's like, oh, they're targeting him. Oh man, he has an explosive game. So he still has the ability, but I don't see the opportunities as much, especially as he starts to get a little bit older.
I want to talk Chase Young, undisciplined Chase Young. I want to talk about cardio king Juwan Jennings and what we're watching for during this NFL Sunday during the San Francisco 49ers Week 9 bye next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by PrizePicks. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball at PrizePicks. And by the way, win 25 times your money this season, this football season and basketball season at PrizePicks. It's super easy. All you do is you select 2 or more players on PrizePicks and you pick more or less on their projected stats. And with the combo bets with basketball and football, it's under the Specials League at PrizePicks, and it's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus George Kittle, a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. So that's how it works with the combo bets between different sports. Super fun on PrizePicks. You can go all NFL if you want, or you can go all basketball if you want at PrizePicks. Other sports as well. It is super fun and win a little bit of money as well. And a special offer for our listeners. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL or download the app and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Mike Silver of the Chronicle had a report shortly after the 49ers traded for Chase Young from the Washington Commanders. And Silver had this to say: Young, according to several Commanders coaches and other organizational sources, was viewed as an undisciplined player who developed bad habits, such as deviating from assignments in an effort to make splash plays. What do you think about that report from Mike Silver? I think the undisciplined thing is okay. Well, let's talk about that. But the fact that his ex-coaches were so willing to talk about that and throw him under the bus makes me think that there's some bridges burned there, and there's some folks that didn't like something about his attitude and effort while he was in Washington.
I think that happens with a lot of guys. They're young, they come out of college, they're the guys. He's the big man on campus at Ohio State. He always was going to be a top 5 pick, likely a top number 1 overall pick, if not for a quarterback going ahead of him. So you kind of look at that, then you get a bunch of money before you even play a snap in the NFL. Then you get there, you're making more than your coaches, you're making more than everyone else. Some guys can't really handle that. And a change of scheme where maybe he was able to kind of freelance a little bit. I've heard, Chad Ochocinco talk about it a lot. Playing for Cincinnati, he was able to kind of freelance a little bit, do kind of what he wanted, and that worked for him in Cincinnati with Carson Palmer, where he went to the New England Patriots, and they're like, "No, you can't do this," and he became essentially ineffective. Now, Chase Young, throughout the start of his career, has been a little bit more on the ineffective side, obviously picking it up this year. But I think sometimes you're just young and you don't understand exactly how to be a professional. So you get traded to the San Francisco 49ers for a pick that aligns with maybe what some of these coaches are saying. And it's on Chris Kasurek to say, all right, look, this is your big opportunity. You want to go make a lot of money in free agency. You're going to do what I tell you to do, and you're going to do it how I tell you to do it. And if he does that, maybe it can be a little bit different for him so he can go get paid this offseason. But I think we're starting to see that with the 5 sacks this year, and maybe Washington already made their mind up on what they were going to do with him. But this is a big opportunity for him. Forget the 49ers. It's a great opportunity for them as well, but a huge opportunity for him moving forward. So hopefully he gets his act right.
Can you imagine what must that be like? Like, Chase Young is in such an interesting spot right now. He can legitimately make himself $50 million by going crazy for 3 or 4 months, right? Like $100 million. Like, how much more is he going to make by balling out with the Niners the rest of the season and into the playoffs on that platform versus the direction he was already going in Washington? Or what if he just put it on cruise control and didn't ball out, didn't go crazy? Like, imagine that. 4 months of work, you can make yourself $50 million. That's the spot that Chase Young's in right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that's exactly what is at stake right now. Like, dude, you got to, do what you're supposed to do. Now, again, they talk about discipline issues, and I think some people assume off the field, which that might be the case as well. A little bit of that, how you prepare. Washington has been losing a lot, and I have played for some losing teams. And a lot of times what happens is your preparation starts to fall off a little bit. Now, there's some people like, let's say like a Larry Fitzgerald. Maybe his was always going to be at the top, but the Eric Crockers of the world and some of these other guys, it's like, okay, you kind of, I don't want to say go through the motions. You say, hey, I'm a good athlete, let me do these things. And you make plays and I've done that. And then, 11 interceptions in a year. Then I go to the San Jose Sabercats and they're like, dude, why were you? Yeah, you had a lot of interceptions, but like, this is bad. Look at this. Look at this technique you used here, and they like really kind of scratched off everything that I felt like I knew about playing the defensive back position and really fixed it. And it was a big change for me. It was really hard, like something you've been doing for so long. And all of a sudden the team is like, all right, this is the right way to do it. You have to buy into this process because you're kind of just a piece to the puzzle. Like, we don't really need you, but you will help us if we have you. And I had to buy into really changing up a lot of my technique. And I think that's what Chase Young is going to have to go through as well, where, hey, like 49ers, we could really use you. I don't know if we 1000% need you if you're not going to be the best version of yourself. Like, we've proven without you, we can go to conference championships, but you can be a part of helping us win that Super Lombardi if you do it how we need you to do it. So that change of culture could definitely help a guy like him as he enters free agency this offseason.
Yeah, and it'll determine if Chase Young's an every down monster for the 49ers or just a rotational guy the rest of the season down the stretch. And he can absolutely be that monster. And look, he has a lot of respect for a guy who's kind of, big brother, Ohio State, Nick Bosa. I got to imagine that's going to help with the effort side of things. Chris Kasurek gets a lot out of defensive linemen that fell out of favor in other places. We've already seen that multiple times now. And with Chase Young, man, he's just what he could potentially be. Because when you look at busts, the history of NFL busts, the most common factor is, man, they didn't really care all that much, right? So if he cares, he's going to be a beast.
That was the one thing that I really realized when I got to the NFL. Because I'm coming from a Division II school, so I'm thinking, and in the Arena League, I'm thinking these guys are just gonna be like these supers, like special talented guys. And I realized right away it's only a few of them, but the guys that are special and freakish, typically they are the guys that go in the top 5. A lot of them don't really care to be better, and that's why you see guys that are bust. It's not like an ability issue with them. It's not an ability issue with Chase Young. It's just buying into what it's going to take to be better. And sometimes guys, when you get that money up front, which I'm pretty sure he probably got 20-something million right away before he plays a snap. Like, it's hard. It's hard for some of those guys if they're not wired the right way. And then that's how you end up being a bust. And injuries and things that he's dealt with as well. Like, you kind of have to factor that in with him as well.
That's the other thing. Injuries is probably the next most common, and he might be dealing with both of those things right now. So we'll see what kind of player the 49ers are getting. I'm excited for it, and I think it's a great fit for him. We've got a question in the chat about Chase Young I want to get to next. Plus, Juwan Jennings, cardio king. Why did my guy Ben Solak, former Locked On host, why did he call Juwan Jennings the cardio king last week? And I want to have a little watch party for the 49ers bye week next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? Then it's time to order DoorDash. Is it halftime? That's ordering time. 2-minute warning, you got it. That's your cue to order in and feast with DoorDash. Whatever it is you want, your local favorites. There's even retail and grocery delivered from DoorDash as well. Whatever you need for your football party, whatever you need to get game day ready. For me, locally, I love the Pizza Hacker with DoorDash. I love DoorDash in the Super Duper Burger. There's all the favorites that you want on DoorDash. So kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything you need for your watch party or tailgate. And since there's no Niners this week, maybe you want to just eat a little extra to help you feel better about not having the 49ers to watch. And our listeners get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, don't forget to use code LOCKED23 for 50% off up to $10 on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Okay, real quick, last thing on Chase Young here. Pan in the chat says, do you think Chase Young is going to a worse D-line with the 49ers? Bosa better than Sweat, statistically not this season, if you're looking at sack production. However, Pan says, Payne plus Allen might be better than Hargrave and Eric Armstead. What do you think?
It's a good question. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. It's not like he's going from a bad D-line to just this massively better defensive line. You're going from maybe a better culture, a better situation in the sense of how the 49ers are viewed as opposed to the Washington Commanders. You're going to what, for the most of the season, has been a better offense. That could really help your defense, which right now, again, I think that's what 49ers kind of banking on as well, kind of picking back up. But better, like player for player, I would take, not saying I would take Washington's D-line over the 49ers if you brought them here, but I wouldn't mind it. So, definitely a very talented defensive line. And that's what the only thing they've been able to hang their hat on for the last few years, because everything else has been so suspect there.
I would take the 49ers group of players over the Washington group of players. No slight on Washington. They're really good. But it really depends on how good Chase Young is. Because if he's able to play better than he did in Washington with the 49ers, then that's going to be a way better line than what they had in Washington. So in a lot of ways, it's up to Chase Young. Which Chase Young are the 49ers going to get? That's how good the 49ers line is going to be compared to the Washington line. But I would still take the other three. I would take what the 49ers have, because I think Bosa is number one of all those guys, even though Sweat has more sacks this year. Like John Lynch said yesterday, Bosa been dominating. Oh, here we go.
What is he? Number one in pressures and QB hits and all that. Like, he hasn't been bad. He just isn't finishing at the quarterback like we're used to seeing, or at least like we saw last year, which, a lot of people are talking about the defensive line this year. I didn't think that the defensive line last year was great. We had those conversations a lot. I was just like, man, it was really kind of masked and covered up by a very dominant Nick Bosa, who had to be the best player in the year in the league for the 49ers to even be close in the sense of the pass rush. Like, you look at Philadelphia Eagles, compared to 49ers last year, the 49ers have 44 sacks. Not bad. Finished top 10. Let's say if you take a few off of Nick Bosa, now you're talking about being around 18, 19 in sacks. Philadelphia, 70 in comparison to the 49ers, 44. So, like, there was a big gap in that type of production, and a lot of it was carried by Nick Bosa. So this year, I think we're just feeling more of that, even though you added guys like Hargraves, like Randy Gregory.
Yeah.
Nick Bosa, you're kind of missing those sacks from him. Mm-hmm. So if Nick Bosa had 8 sacks right now, 9 sacks right now, I think we'd be viewing the defensive line a little different.
Shout out to our guy, John Chapman, showed up in the chat. He says, I've taken 0 shots with Crocker or Peacock this season. This is why the 49ers dropped 3 in a row. I agree, John. More shots need to be had between all 3 of us. So we got to get together at one of these 49ers games and remedy that situation real quick. I think that's
I have not been to a game this year. I went to a preseason Raider game. Like, that's it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I was supposed to go to Pittsburgh, and that didn't happen. That's where we were supposed to have our shots with Chapman. We didn't start the season off right. So, yeah, we do have to remedy that one for sure. Real quick, Ben Solak of The Ringer, formerly of the Locked On Podcast Network, he said, congrats to Cardio King Juwan Jennings, who ran the most routes of a player this season, 33 last week, without receiving a single target. Not only not a reception, not even a target. Juwan Jennings in there for Deebo Samuel ran 33 stinking routes, not even targeted a single time against the Bengals last week, Croc.
Yeah, that's tough. And I felt that, my PrizePicks, looking at my slip, and I had the higher or more on his receptions, and he had 0. And not just 0 targets. That's pretty wild, especially for a guy who you would assume kind of filling in for Deebo at some point. It's like, okay, we'll get the ball to him. And, Juwan Jennings does some things very well, but maybe he's just not suited to be a little bit more of a focal point than what he is when you do have Deebo, Ayuk, Kittle. All those guys kind of take the pressure off of him a little bit.
Looking ahead to week 9, which game are you most excited to watch? Because, Croc, you always talk about you're a football fan even before you're a San Francisco 49ers fan. So I know you're going to be glued to it. I'm going to be glued to it. I'm going to be working because I got to talk about all these games on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, even though there's no 49ers game. And there's some implications for the playoffs for the 49ers. By the way, even though the 49ers lost last week, they only dropped 2 percentage points for their likelihood of making the playoffs. The Bengals, by beating the 49ers, jumped up 17% in how likely it is for them to make the playoffs. So that game was a lot more important for the Bengals to win than it was in the 49ers losing, only dropping 2%, and they're still top 3 in the NFL in the likelihood that the 49ers make the playoffs. And it'll be a lot easier if someone like the Seahawks loses against the Ravens. So 5-2 Seahawks at the 6-2 Ravens. That's a really good game this week. And the Seahawks get another half game on the 49ers if they are able to win this one this week, already leading the West currently. I have a feeling that might not last long, but the Niners got to start a new trend and get back on a winning streak. And Mike McDaniel in Germany, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek against his old buddy Patrick Mahomes, Dolphins Chiefs, 6-2 Dolphins, 6-2 Chiefs in Frankfurt, Germany. Unfortunately, it's at 6:30 a.m. for us, Croc, here on West Coast time, but that's going to be a great one too.
I will not be missing that game. I'll be up at 6 a.m. and definitely tuned in. Again, I talk about how much I love football. I actually love waking up at 6:30 and there's football on the TV. You get to lay in bed and just kind of watch the game. So that's a really good game. I'm excited to see right there. Also, a couple more games. Dallas Cowboys against the Philadelphia Eagles. Can't wait to watch that. And then probably Buffalo and Cincinnati, where 2 teams that haven't really been at their full strengths. But I think just being a primetime game, Monday Night Football, that's a game that I'm definitely intrigued to watch.
Yeah, even though there's no 49ers, a fantastic slate. So it's still a good week to, get the popcorn ready, get the DoorDash going and watch a whole bunch of really good football games. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, and hopefully for the 49ers' sake and for our listeners' sakes, the Seahawks do lose that one and drop one in Baltimore to the Ravens. By the way, Jaron Hall How about this for the Vikings? Jaron Hall, the rookie BYU quarterback, he's going to start in place of Kirk Cousins. They traded for Josh Dobbs. I don't know if that job's going to end up going to Josh Dobbs, Croc. But guess what? Jaron Hall is about 3-4 years older than Trey Lance. Because we were talking about how, man, it would be good to have Trey Lance in Minnesota right now. Jaron Hall's a rookie. He's going to turn 26 years old before the season's over. And
BYU quarterback, I'm assuming he went on a mission.
I think he is Mormon. Yeah. Always a lot of older prospects coming out of BYU. So that's not a shocker there. Will Levis is older than Trey Lance as well. Will Levis is had a hell of a debut last week, 4 touchdowns, getting ready for that Thursday nighter tonight. We got to get the folks out of here for that game. But yeah, Will Levis. You think he's going to throw another 4 touchdowns? I think there's a chance that he goes 4 interceptions this week. I think it's going to be not a crash and burn, because I really enjoyed how he was letting it fly. Like it didn't seem like the moment was too big for him. It was like a lot of short stuff, a lot of play action. Then he was slinging it. So I love that. But I think he's going to sling it into some interceptions as well. Might be more like young Josh Allen for Will Levis early in his career, but a promising start.
He was throwing the ball up to DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins, a guy who I heard a lot from 49er fans who said that he was washed. He didn't look washed last week. As a matter of fact, He hasn't looked washed at all this season. Like once he got to play, he's been doing very, very well for the team. So big time for a young quarterback, a guy who you don't have to be the super accurate guy. Just put the ball in the area, and he's figuring out a way how to come down with those balls. So DeAndre Hopkins, man, he's killing it. And people remember he had put out a list and talked about how he didn't get a phone call back from the 49ers. And that's when people were like, oh, well, he's washed. Anyways, I'm like, how's he washed? He was hurt. He missed the last 2 years. He's missed games, but the production when he's playing has always been there. And I think we're seeing that right now.
Last note here. Unfortunate what happened in Las Vegas with the Raiders. Jimmy G, just disastrous season so far over there. Everything disastrous just about happening. He leads the league in interceptions. Everyone gets fired following the trade deadline, even though they didn't trade anybody away. Just weird stuff going on with the Raiders. Jimmy G gets benched, and then the social team's like, "Happy birthday, Jimmy," on Twitter today. I was like, oh man, poor Jimmy.
I saw that, man. I feel bad for Jimmy. I guess the question is, how good is Kyle Shanahan at masking the deficiencies of quarterbacks? Right? Because I mean, you look at Jimmy G on the Raiders, he doesn't even look like salvageable. Like it didn't even look like a guy that you might be able to get by with. And that was not the case with the 49ers. I mean, he was top 5 in pretty much every statistical category in 2019. And most of the time playing with the 49ers, I mean, the efficiency was there, the completion percentage was there. I mean, game-winning drives. He kind of gave you a little bit of everything. And then you watch him on the Raiders, and it's like, you look like trash. How good is Kyle Shanahan?
Unbelievable, man. Everything going on with Jimmy Garoppolo now makes either Josh McDaniels look just horrid or makes Kyle Shanahan look amazing, or maybe some combination of both.
It's always in between. It's always right there in the middle.
Gray area. We live in that gray area, Croc. That's why the folks tune in, because we can tell you straight. We're not gonna skirt it. Appreciate all the listeners. Appreciate all the everydayers out there. Croc and I back after all of the weekend's football action, as we are every single day right here, Locked On 49ers.